Andy Johnson. This is the short video lesson on critical race theory, what it is and what it is not. First of all, misconception, Marxism. Critical race theory has nothing to do with Marxism. The connection to Marxism that's sometimes made by some groups seems to be based on the word equity, and that's a bit of a stretch. The term equity refers to fairness and justice, not equal outcomes. So the term Marxism and communism and socialism is used very much like a scary buzzword, like was used in the 50s by Joseph McCarthy. But critical race theory has nothing to do with Marxism. It just does not. It does not, as is commonly said, teach children to hate white people. It just doesn't. How would that lesson go? Boys and girls, I'm white, you should hate me. It just doesn't do that. Saying so doesn't make it so. It does not teach children that they need to be ashamed of being white. It just doesn't. And I'm going to show you what it does say. And it does not promote the idea that America is bad or that you should hate America or that George Washington was bad. Nope. It just doesn't do that. And again, saying it so doesn't make it so. And it does not call for eliminating historical events from any curriculum. Some people think it asks for the removal of the Holocaust or it doesn't ask for any of these things to be removed from curriculum. Instead, it asks for the full history of the United States to be presented and for all perspectives to be included in the conversation, not just a singular perspective. More on that in a minute. And a common theory or a common criticism is, well, there's no research to support this theory. And I say, have you ever actually looked? There is a whole bunch of research related to areas of systemic racism and critical race theory if you do a literature review. Here are just some of the examples. But there is a lot of supporting research. Just saying there's no research does not make it so. What it does say is we need to include the lens of critical race theory within our curriculums, because that is going to help prepare our students to succeed, not in a singular community, but including the lens of critical race theory within our curriculums, help our students succeed in an increasingly diverse and interconnected global community. So we are preparing our students by including the lens of critical race theory within our curriculums. We are helping students get ready for a future in which they will be interacting with diverse groups of people and populations. So let's take a look at a theory. Critical race theory is a theory, after all. A theory is a way to explain a set of facts. It connects the data dots like a dot-to-dot picture. And different theories connect different data dots differently. Here's some examples of different behavioral learning theories. They all describe learning. They all connect data dots. They all explain phenomena. But they connect different data dots. Behavioral learning theory, cognitive learning theory, neurocognitive learning theory. Is one right and one wrong? Well, you could say one is supported by more data. But these are all different ways to explain a set of facts. Systemic or critical race theory explains a set of facts. It is one such theory used to explain and understand the phenomenon known as systemic racism. It invites us to critically examine our policies, our practices, our assessments, our curriculums, our courses. And these are sometimes uncomfortable, but necessary conversations for us to have. Now, critical race theory came out of critical legal studies in the 70s. Derek Bell and Richard Delgado are two of the founders of this. They were concerned with the slow pace of progress on social justice and racial equity issues. It seems like the gains made with the protests and marches in the 60s began to produce smaller and fewer gains. So this is where the theory emanated from in the 70s. It came out of the legal system. Gloria Ladson-Billing in the 90s took this theory with others. She is one of the pioneers and brought these ideas into education. This theory creates a lens through which to view our various social systems, legal systems, economic systems, political, prison, and yes, our educational systems. It is a lens through which we view things. It asks, in these systems, who gains and who's exploited? Who gets the resources? Who's advantaged and who is disadvantaged? How are marginalized populations depicted? Whose voice dominates? Whose is silenced? Who is included and excluded? Who gets the opportunities and resources? Who doesn't? Who gets sent to prison? Who gets rewarded? Who gets attention? Who's making money? Who's paying money? What makes it difficult for some and easier for others? These are the questions it asks when we examine these different systems. And you must ask, who is it that doesn't want us to ask these questions? So 7 big ideas that seem to be common to critical race theory when I reviewed many sources on this. And this is one of the best books, Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanik. I would recommend this, 3rd edition, if you really want to get your head around critical race theory. The first big idea is racism is normal. It's so ingrained in our societal consciousness that most don't see it. But our brains see racism in the form of implicit bias. As well, our policies, our programs, our laws, our procedures do. This is systemic racism. For change to occur, we must expose systemic racism as well as that which maintains and perpetuates it. We must unmask it. One definition of systemic racism. It has to do with systems: political, economic, legal, judicial, educational. It includes the policies, procedures, rules, laws, regulations, traditions, institutions, paradigms, ways of thinking that disadvantage people of color while providing advantage to the white privileged majority in terms of opportunities and resources. Who gets the opportunities? Who gets the resources? Well, you have to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, they say. If you haven't got boots, you can't pull yourself up. If you have connections, if your father has connections, if you have political connections, if you go to the right schools and make connections, absolutely you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The second big idea: change will only occur when it aligns with the interests of those in power. And for people of color, it will only occur when it coincides with the changing economic conditions and self-interests of the 1 to 5% of those in power. Couple of examples. The Washington Redskins. Daniel Snyder said, "No, never ever will I change the name. We are the Redskins." However, when sponsors started pulling their ads, all of a sudden the scales fell from his eyes. Wow! And it finally hit him in the pocketbook, and the name became the Washington football team. 2 years ago, Milwaukee Bucks were playing in the finals, and this was during the time of unrest, the George Floyd murder. They said, "We are not going to play." all of a sudden the NBA took notice, and we saw more attention being given to Black Lives Matter. We saw the signs. We saw the respectful kneeling. And one example that Derek Bell provides, and this is interesting. Remember, he's coming from a legal perspective. Brown versus Board of Education, that says separate but equal school systems is not equal. Got rid of segregated schools. And some people say, well, there was just this great moral reckoning. We suddenly decided that this was the moral thing to do. But Derek Bell said, no, it advanced Cold War objectives. The United States was competing with the Soviet Union for Third World War loyalties. And how could we say to these Third World countries that you must become like us, a democracy, when we had people of color being discriminated against? As well, during 1954, to quell the threat of the Black World War II veterans who saw discrimination as an affront to their service in World War II. Change will only occur when it aligns with the interests of those in power. And segregation in 1954 was seen as an impediment to the economic development in the South. So it was to facilitate desegregation of the South and the economic expansion. This is one of the reasons why Brown v. Board of Education was passed. When the interest aligns with those in power. Race is a social construct. It has no basis in biology. It's based on an arbitrary category, physical appearance, that society has created, based around the idea of this mythical white norm. Oh, yes, we are normal, and if you're not like us, you are abnormal. And race becomes a sorting mechanism. These arbitrary categories, a sorting mechanism. We're going to sort you into this, that, and the other thing. And this sorting has both material and psychological impacts. It creates winners and losers. But genetically, there is no difference. No person has a single identity. This is the idea of intersectionality between race and other marginalized communities, gender, ability, sexual orientation, race, social economic status, religion, and culture. Understanding and oppression and marginalization in one group enables greater understanding of all marginalized groups. However, this concept of intersectionality does not mean that you can substitute one area of marginalization for another. It doesn't mean that being an LGBT person is the same, feels the same oppression as being a person, an African American. You can't substitute one for another. What it means is there is an interplay between these various areas of marginalization. In research, we call it an interaction between gender, race, social class. All right? They do not operate independently of each other, collectively or in combination. They can exert a more powerful influence than individually. Now, this idea of intersectionality came about when the black women of the 60s found they had to deal with issues of being black and being women. That's where this idea of intersectionality comes. Remember, it's an interaction between the various marginalized groups. All people in a category do not think and act the same. Physical characteristics referred to by racial terms are not indicative of a deeper underlying commonality or shared traits. One famous black person does not speak for all black people. All people's experiences are different. One person of color should not be asked to be the spokesperson or try to explain systemic racism. 6. The stories of the people must be heard. Hearing and honoring the perception and experiences of real people is essential in making progress towards social justice and racial equity. And one of the ways that we must hear the stories. Now, numbers without context is one of the way of muting the voices of the people. And we have this over-reliance on quantitative data to describe reality. Numbers without context provides this distorted view of reality. As well, disallowing voices of marginalized groups in education occurs through disremembering and misremembering of history. Here, history is described only through the lens of the privileged majority. Now, if you grew up like me, you had the McGraw-Hill version of reality, of U.S. history, where marginalized groups are often misremembered using cartoonish configurations, distortions, omissions, and blatant misrepresentation. Disremembering, misremembering. Now, books like these describe a decidedly different view of U.S. history. Here, the atrocities of slavery, the greed of colonialism, the avarice of imperialism, and the wanton genocide of indigenous peoples are fully portrayed. These books help us understand. Some of these books could be assigned maybe to the high school level, but all of these books can be used to help us understand at all levels. These pictures are very hard to look at because we know they're true. These pictures are very hard to look at because we know they're true. Now, this does not say that America is bad or white people should be ashamed. It simply says that we need to fully remember all of American history. There are some really good things about this country, but remembering it all, including all, is how we continue to evolve. Remembering the full history. Of course, we would not show something like this to early elementary. We present things that are developmentally appropriate. Cultural superiority and the mythical norm are factors in maintaining systemic racism. Redefined factors, that means maintaining a belief that one's own culture is the correct one. It should be used as a standard of comparison. This is called cultural parochialism. My practices, customs, lifestyles, traditions, views, and values are the right ones. Those that do not align with the dominant white culture are said to be defective or deviant or inferior. Right and wrong, good and bad, normal and abnormal are all determined by the majority white culture. This is white superiority. These are factors contributing to systemic racism. This does not say that whites are bad, does not say that, or that white culture is bad. It simply says that it should not be the norm to which all others are evaluated. Now, there's this fallacy that there's a standardized way that things should be. That's the fallacy. Oh, things should be like this. Everyone should be like us. If they were just like us, if they're only like us, all their problems would go away. If they would just assimilate, everything would be just right. Our values are the right ones. They should adopt our values. And again, this does not say that white people are bad or white culture is bad. It simply says it should not be the norm to which all others are compared. Here are just some of the sources I used, And again, including the lens of critical race theory within our curriculums will help prepare our students to succeed in an increasingly diverse and interconnected global community. Critical race has nothing to do with Marxism. It does not teach children to hate white people. It does not teach children to be ashamed of being white. It does not promote the idea that America is bad. It does not advocate eliminating historical events from K-12 curriculum. It's a theory based on a wealth of data. 7 tenets. Racism is normal. Change occurs only when it aligns with the interests of those in power. Race is a social construct. No person has a single identity. All people in a category do not think and act the same. The stories of the people must be heard. Cultural parochialism and white superiority are factors in maintaining systemic racism.